What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. In this video, I want to share one of my favorite jerkbaits that very few anglers throw because it gets overshadowed by some very popular baits on the market. Let's get into it. Today's hidden gem is the Megabass Vision 110 Plus 2 jerkbait, the deepest diving jerkbait in the Megabass lineup. It's a bait I throw all the time, but it always gets overshadowed by its shallower diving counterparts like the Vision 110 or the Vision 110 Plus 1, which are a lot more popular. I throw the Vision 110 Plus 2 though for several different reasons, and I'll get into those here as we talk through the video, but just comparing these two baits, you can see that the Vision 110 has a much smaller lip to it. It is going to run a lot shallower. This bait runs anywhere from maybe 2 to 4 feet of water on 12-pound tests in a bait caster. And then this Vision 110 Plus 2 will dive anywhere from 8 to 12 feet deep on, again, 12-pound test on a bait caster. There's several advantages to that Vision 110 Plus 2, and even though these have the exact same profile to them, they have a very different action and very different application. The one thing you'll find with that Vision 110 Plus 2 is that because that bill is so much longer, it's going to have a lot less side-to-side darting action to it, and it's going to almost act a little bit more like a crankbait compared to a jerkbait. It still has a pretty decent erratic side-to-side motion, but it's a lot less erratic than a Vision 110 traditional jerkbait. And this can actually be to your advantage because I feel like sometimes those fish don't want a super aggressive jerkbait, especially as water temperatures start to fall in the fall time of the year and into the winter. So you get a different cutting action, a different side-to-side action with that Vision 110 Plus 2. You also have a longer bill on that bait, which allows it to deflect off cover like brush, rocks, laydowns, things like that a lot better. So when you're fishing this bait, you're not going to have to worry about getting hung up as much, which is nice when you're fishing a pretty expensive bait. Now, a lot of guys will use forward-facing sonar with these jerk baits, and so they don't worry about getting hung up, but I don't always throw my jerk baits with forward-facing sonar. A lot of times I just like to go fishing without forward-facing, and by having that longer bill on that jerk bait, I can basically get that bait to hit up against a brush pile or a laydown, and then it'll deflect off and I can get the bait back without having to worry about losing it or getting it hung up or anything like that. So I do like that a lot. Also, this bill is really, really solid, so it's less likely to break if you hit against a rock or any type of trees or anything, and so it is going to hold up better. And another thing about this bait is that you can also just change the depth on it in a lot of different ways. You can get the bait to go deeper by actually causing it to sink rather than suspend like it does out of the package. And the way I do that is actually upgrading the front treble hook from the stock Outbarb Megabass hooks to this Gamakatsu size 2 EWG treble hook. The EWG I like throwing on the front of this jerkbait because I do throw it around brush quite a bit, and that EWG doesn't get snagged in the brush as much. So in combination with that longer bill, that 2/0 EWG on the size 2 Gamakatsu EWG on the front, that bait will deflect off cover, and it will also sink very slowly depending on the water temperature. So as water temperatures change or get warmer or cooler, this bait will either float more or sink more. And you're gonna have to test it when you get to your lake as far as what the current water temperature is causing the bait to do. Is it rising more than the stock, or is it sinking more than the stock weighting? So what I like to do is have this bait fall at about a foot every 4 seconds. I want it falling extremely slow because I don't want that bait to sink like a rock and get down in the rocks and in the brush. But I want to be able to wait, let's say 20 seconds and get this bait down an extra 5 feet. So if it's falling 4 feet or falling a foot every 4 seconds, if I wait 20 seconds, it'll sink an extra 5 feet deep. And a lot of times, if this bait's running 10 foot on average, I can now get it down in the 15-foot strike zone, no problem, which is awesome. Now, you sometimes may need to even weight this bait more depending on the water temperatures. And the way I'll do that is just adding an extra split ring to the front of this bait. And I have actually an example here with another jerk bait that actually has the exact same profile, or relatively same profile that I throw a lot as well, which is the Spro Mixed Stick Plus 1. even though this is the +1 mixed stick, it has more of that long bill like the Megabass. They're practically the same bait, to be honest. And the mixed stick's a little bit less expensive, so I will throw the mixed stick more when I'm fishing without forward-facing sonar, but I do like the casting system and the overall color palettes and just the motion of that Vision 110 +2 if I have the option. So if I'm not fishing around a ton of brush, a ton of rocks, or if I'm using forward-facing sonar, I always pick up the Vision 110 +2. I just seem to get more bites, have more confidence in it. I've caught so many fish on it. But if I'm not using forward-facing, I go with the mixed stick +1 just because it saves, you know, 10 bucks on the bait. And a lot of times that can be helpful if you're snagging these baits and losing them. It hurts to lose these baits regardless. I have a plug knocker in my boat that I use to get the bait out. It's just a hound dog lure retriever, so that'll usually work on these anyways. But getting slightly off topic, if you do want to weight that bait more, you can change out that front treble hook like I showed earlier, which can get it to sometimes sink, but sometimes it'll just get that bait to just suspend still. What you can do is add another extra split ring to that front hook hanger. So this bait, I've added one extra size 5 split ring to that front hook hanger. And I don't usually like wrapping lead wire around the hooks or different things like that, just because it can come off. It's kind of a pain in the butt. And I just add that extra split ring. It's never caused me any issues before, and it'll cause that bait again to weight a little bit more down. Now you can do a combo if you really need to, for whatever reason the bait is still not sinking with that extra split ring. You can upgrade the front treble hook and add that split ring, and now it's definitely going to be sinking in most cases. I do like to add the weight to the front hook hanger to get that bait to run nose down, though I know there are guys who do like that bait to sink backwards. The reason I don't like it sinking backwards is because then when I go to jerk it, I feel like I sometimes will just jerk it straight into the brush piles and I'll get hung up. So I like to weight it so that it falls nose down like this, so that way when I move it, it will pop up and it'll pop over the brush, if that makes any sense. So it just gets me hung up less. So that's why I always weight the front hook hanger if I can. I've tried suspend strips and suspend dots and different things over the years. They just come off and they're a pain in the butt. So this is what I've found that's the best for me with jerkbaits. And I throw jerkbaits a lot, guys, especially in the winter. I've thrown them for years. Oh my goodness, we're all hung up here. I've thrown them for years, guys, and way before forward-facing sonar. And it's one of my favorite baits of all time. Now a lot of guys throw them, which is kind of a bummer because I feel like I was catching a lot more fish on jerkbaits before forward-facing sonar just because no one else was fishing them. And it's just kind of a bummer that it got found out. But, you know, guys were always throwing jerkbaits, but they weren't throwing them offshore and in the areas I'm throwing them. They fish them on, you know, flat banks, bluff wall ends, stuff like that, but not over deep brush piles, not over ledges in the winter, which is where I was throwing them and having a lot of success. But anyway, so these are the two jerkbaits I like to throw. They both basically do the exact same thing. So I wouldn't say that one is necessarily like going to catch you a ton more fish. That Megabass just comes in more color palettes, again, slightly better action, I feel like, and better casting. You can cast this Megabass a lot further. It has a great weight transfer system than that Spro. I mean, Spro has a decent weight transfer system, so it's not bad, but I can usually cast this bait into the wind like an extra 15, 20 feet usually, which allows me to actually get it deeper as well. The longer casts you make, the deeper you can get this bait. So there's just too many advantages for me not to throw the Vision 110 +2 over this. But again, if you're price conscious or you're in a lot of brush, this bait will still work. Now for my equipment with these bigger baits, what I like to do is throw it on, this is actually a crankbait rod that I have a crankbait on right now, and I want to show you that because this is actually my crankbait rod. It's a Denali 7-foot medium power moderate action crankbait rod in the Lithium Pro lineup. And I throw my square bills on this at times, but I mainly throw my rock crawlers on it. And I have multiple of these in the boat in the winter when I go fishing. I just didn't have 2 of them rigged up, but basically this rod works really well with that 7-foot length because this bait is going to be in deeper water, and I just find that I can work it more effectively in deep water with that longer rod. With the smaller, like just Vision 110 standards, I'll actually throw this on a 6'8" crankbait rod, just a medium moderate crankbait rod, 6'8". With that shallower diving jerkbait. But with those deeper diving jerkbaits, I go to a 7-foot medium moderate crankbait rod. And this rod has caught me a ton of fish with this bait. Like this combo right here has been absolutely dynamite. And I'm usually throwing this on, I'm throwing it on 10 to 12 pound fluorocarbon line, especially when water temperatures are above 45 degrees. Whenever water temperatures are above 45 degrees, I throw 10 to 12 pound fluorocarbon, and that will usually get the job done. I've thrown monofilament at times over the years. I kind of got away from throwing monofilament with the jerk baits just because I like to be able to weight that bait down deeper, and that fluoro can sink a little bit over time and get that bait just like a foot deeper. But when the water temperatures get super cold and the air temperatures get super cold, so you're dealing with like ice in your guides, frozen hands, frozen reel, like you get ice piling up in your reel, and water temps are below 45 degrees, I will go to monofilament with this bait because fluoro does have a tendency to snap a little bit easier. And I really don't like snapping off these baits on a cast or on a hook set or whatever. So if your water temperatures are below 45 and it's frigid outside, you have ice collecting in your guides and your reel seat here, go to monofilament. Just 10 pound monofilament works really well, and you won't have as many issues with that. But usually 10 to 12 pound fluoro will get the job done. You can also go to a little bit heavier fluorocarbon if you want to get this bait in and around cover more. And I do that a lot more with this Spro mixed stick +1. What I'll do is actually pair this on 16 pound fluorocarbon. It'll cause it to dive shallower, but because you have that longer bill, it'll deflect off cover better. So if I'm really fishing like shallow brush piles that are in 10 foot of water, or sorry, not 10 foot, in like 5 foot of water, sorry. If I'm fishing those brush piles in like 5 foot of water that are, well, I guess I was right, sorry, I was actually right. 10 foot of water, but they're topping out 5 feet deep. I knew I had a reason I said 10 foot. So basically what's happening is that you're fishing a brush pile, it's on the bottom of the lake, and the brush pile itself isn't 10 feet, but it's 5 feet tall. Well, this bait is going to usually dig all the way down to 8 feet of water, and you're gonna get hung up like crazy in that brush pile that's topping out in 5 feet. So what you wanna do is get that bait to just barely hit the top of that brush pile that's 5 feet deep. And so the way you do that is increase your line diameter. So I'll go to 16 pound fluorocarbon, also make slightly shorter casts to get that bait not as deep, and just work it just over those brush piles. And I like that longer bill because it will deflect off of the brush better than the standard Vision 110. If you're fishing with forward-facing sonar, you can kind of get away with throwing the Vision 110 because you can just see where the bait is. But again, if you're not using forward-facing, you have to be more conscious of the snags and of the wood. So bigger bill jerkbait, heavier line can work really well there. As far as the retrieve goes for these deeper diving jerkbaits, you're not going to want to fish them exactly like you would a shallower diving jerkbait. You still want to make sure that you give the bait slack line and then twitch your rod tip to get that bait to dart side to side. But because this bait doesn't have such an aggressive darting motion, you can actually get away with sometimes just pulling the bait with your rod tip on a semi-slack line, which will cause that bait sometimes to dig down, swim a little bit. And then you can give it a few twitches or a few pulls, which will cause that bait to pull deeper. And you can get a lot different action out of this bait than a standard jerkbait in that way. There are so many different ways to retrieve this, honestly, that it would be hard to cover them all in this video. I may make a video in the future just going through all my retrieves, but the kind of 3 that I use that are the most common are basically casting that bait out, reeling it down, and then again, with some slack in the line, I'll give it a twitch a couple times, then I'll just kind of pull my rod 2 to 3 feet to let that bait dart a couple times, then kind of just wiggle forward, and then I'll dart it a couple times and just pull it forward. So that's my first retrieve. The second one is actually casting that thing out, reeling it down, and then just reeling it a couple of times quick with my reel handle. So I just reel my reel handle 2 or 3 times in a short, choppy motion. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That will cause that bait to dig down a little bit and kind of move to the side, but I'm not giving it a bunch of big rod twitches. This bait almost acts, again, a little bit more like a crankbait than an actual jerkbait, and it just gives it a completely different look in the water. The third option is going to be just a cast it out there, reel it down to depth, and doing a long pull. So pulling your rod slowly 6 to 7 feet, almost like you're sweeping a football jig or a Carolina rig. Then letting that bait pause and then just sweeping that rod tip nice and slow. And all that bait's doing is just wiggling down on the bottom or down in the middle of the water column and just kind of reeling it in almost like a crankbait. Those 3 retrieves usually are going to get the job done, and I'll experiment between the 3 when I'm fishing a spot. If you can see the fish on forward-facing sonar, you can get a better idea quickly of which retrieve is working the best. But if you don't have forward-facing, I usually try to make 2 to 3 casts with each retrieve on each spot I'm fishing. Most of the time when I'm fishing this bait too, I'm fishing a pretty specific target. I'm trying to target a brush pile, a group of timber, a specific rock pile I've marked on side scan, or a specific drop off or ledge with some rock or brush around it. So I'm not trying to cover a lot of water with this bait. I'm trying to put it in front of an area where I feel confident a fish is at, and then trying to give those fish a different look with slightly different retrieves than what most guys are going to do by just twitching a jerkbait over the top of them. It gets a little bit deeper, has different action, and will come through brush better than the standard jerkbait. And this is definitely a hidden gem that a lot of guys definitely need to try out, because if you haven't thrown it before, it can put a lot of fish for you in the boat. I start throwing it a ton in October all the way through basically April. So from now all the way through the winter and in through the pre-spawn, this is going to be on deck of my boat 100% of the time, one of these 2 baits. So definitely check out that Megabass Vision 110 Plus 2 or that Spromix Stick Plus 1. Either of them work really well, and you're going to put a lot of good fish in the boat this fall. Thanks for checking out this video, guys, and we'll see you in the next episode of Bass Fishing Declassified.